Thank you all, and welcome to our RTDNA Canada National Conference. Oh my goodness, 6 months ago when we were talking about this, it was like it seemed so far away, and then the days got closer and closer, and the stress got higher and higher. But you know what? 36 hours. We've got 36 hours to learn, enjoy, chat with each other, and share information, and share practices, and share, like the wins, the occasional, challenges. We'll just call them at that. You're here because you care about our craft of journalism and the future of our industry. Over the next 2 days, our conference has put together some sessions on hot topics of our concern in all of our newsrooms. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which I joined this gathering from today. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory, which is the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples, and is home to many other Indigenous nations. Prior to the arrival of colonial settlers, these sovereign Indigenous nations entered into the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, in which they agreed to peacefully share and protect the land and resources. We acknowledge that Toronto is also covered by Treaty 13. Also, before we begin this morning, we could not put this conference together without the support of our sponsors. CBC News, Global News, CTV News, City News, Omni, CNN News Source, the Google News Initiative, Ipsos, the Canadian Press, and LiveU. So thank you very much, because we're here because of your generous support, and we really, really appreciate it. So before we start, put your phones on silent. I challenge you not to look at them for the next hour. And we'll kick things off with our annual Bear Pit, bringing together the leaders of the 4 major news organizations in the country and moderated by Global News anchor Farah Nasser.
Is this on? Yes, it is. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? I know it's been a really heavy few weeks, and I'm really glad you're here because there's so many important topics that we need to talk about this morning. In fact, Liz and I have been going back and forth on questions, and there's new ones that we just keep adding because the world is changing so rapidly. And I'm going to borrow something that you just told me. I'm going to steal it right from you because I think it's so relevant to start this. Liz just said to me that she heard someone say, truth is no longer a commodity. And it's so true. We are in this time where we have so many questions. We're struggling on how to cover things and how to present things to our viewers and listeners and readers. And so I can't imagine what it's like to even consume this news without the knowledge that we all have and how confusing it must be. So I'm very happy to have our Bear Pit today, especially of all days, because there's, as I mentioned, so much to talk about. And I'm going to get to it because there's many questions. So let me start with the introductions. These are the 4 broadcast news leaders in our country. I'm going to start with Brodie Fenlon from CBC. Next, please welcome to the stage Richard Gray from CTV News. Ward Smith from Global News. And Amar Sodhi from City TV, City News, and Omni. All right, someone was asking why this is called the Bear Pit, and it's because sometimes these conversations can get a little testy. We'll see what happens today. But I think with what's happening in the world, I'm sure we'll have a lot of agreement on this stage as well. So I think to start, I'd like to ask you all, I don't know about all of you, I have not been sleeping for the past 2 weeks. I'm sure you haven't. So Brodie, what keeps you up at night?
I have not been sleeping. Well, I find myself, I wake up in the middle of dreams where I'm explaining journalistic principles and practices and trying to convince somebody that we're credible. I guess I'm probably like everyone in the room. I worry about distrust. I worry about the swirl of disinformation that happens, and we're not in some of these spaces now where the conversation about our coverage is happening. I've lived through my own little experience around trying to explain how we approach a story this week, and I wrote an editor's blog, and somebody wanted to share that to Facebook, but they couldn't because we're blocked. So those are some of the challenges that I've been thinking a lot about.
Richard?
I mean, very similar to what Brody has talked about, but probably the biggest thing on my mind, and this has been a preoccupation for a number of years, and that is the economic challenges of our business. We have for a very, very long time now found ourselves in a place, in a position where we have been forced to look at what it is we do and how we do it in a very different way, because the business model that has funded all the great things that we do by way of covering this country and covering the world has been turned upside down. And that's probably the biggest thing on my mind most of the time.
Ford?
Good morning, everyone. Staying up at night. I think it's usually the news that keeps me awake. I read a lot at night, and I think about the next day, all against the background of, how do we do it better? How do we create an environment for people like everyone here in the room to feel supported, know that their job is valued, and that, whatever the economic outcome of all of this is, we still have quality content. And frankly, serving the audience is what keeps me up at night, making sure that we're fair, not only in our coverage, but to them and what they need to have the next day, let's say, on navigating what is an increasingly complicated and at times sad world. But I do love the conversations about news. I love having a panel discussion around, how can we be better at it? And I think that, over the last couple of years, whether it's the pandemic or whether it's Black Lives Matters or whether it's just the economic pressure or the technical giants that are, sort of taking so much away from Canadian journalists, there's always people like yourselves.
Amar?
For us, the challenge is that you want to make sure that the leadership team has done enough across the country to put our journalists who are on the front lines to be able to tell the story properly. And a lot of times our teams, some folks are young; they don't have the experience to tell complicated stories like the ones we're finding ourselves in now, to make sure that they've got all the balance and context to be able to tell those stories. Then also, there's the tools and, navigating the economic reality of making sure that people feel that they've got the support that they need, whether it's editorially, whether it's financially, and also, the tools that they have to do the job, and also to do it safely, kind of like what you put out on your Facebook post yesterday. It is hard for a lot of people, and I think you want to make sure that people are taken care of in that manner as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's a tough time for not just journalists, for everyone right now, and I think it's impacting a lot of people's mental health. And let's kind of weave all of the things that you spoke about into the biggest story right now, which is what's happening in the Middle East. And I think the economic constraints is one challenge. We have crews on the ground; their safety is another challenge. Misinformation, disinformation, information not coming from one side because journalists can't get in there. There are just so many challenges. But Richard, I'd like to start with you because, when we talk about people on the ground, you recently cut, or CTV, cut bureaus, right? So how has this conflict been to cover it, and what's been the challenge there?
There really, at least from my perspective, has been no marked difference in our coverage. We dispatched 2 crews to the Middle East, to Tel Aviv. And that's probably very similar in number to what we would have done historically. The only difference is that they were dispatched from Canada as opposed to being dispatched from London and Canada. But no, again, from my perspective, no real difference. I think one of the fundamental challenges that we all faced with respect to covering this particular story was that it happened so quickly. It happened, what for us was a long weekend, and it was really tough to get crews in, no matter where they were coming from, right? The scale and scope of what happened in that region turned everything naturally upside down, and I know we found it really, really hard to get our initial crew in. Probably took about 24 hours longer than what ideally it would have been, but I know that was a similar challenge that all faced.
And I guess, Ward, I'll turn it to you because I was working that long weekend anchoring, and we had a bunch of sick calls. There was just so much happening. I remember that weekend. It was so difficult to get people and experienced people on desk. So talk to me about some of the challenges that you found covering this. We dispatched people, I know, right away. What's it been like for you?
Well, I mean, look, this is such an incredibly complex story, and the historical context is always present. Our team on the ground, we have 6 people, employees and others that are supporting us, and we've found the coverage remarkable. I am so impressed with the storytelling, the people that we're hearing from, and the challenge, of course, is not only in each story, but in each newscast and on each platform, that there is a balance and an understanding that what is said will be measured against what isn't said, or what somebody else said, or who said it. So we've got an amazing editorial lead on the story with serious vetting, high standards, and expectations. And so what I find is the challenge is the sustaining of this story and ensuring that there isn't a gap. And when there is one, we have to explain why. So we're not able to be in Gaza, but we have been communicating with people in Gaza. We've been featuring them in our news stories. And ultimately, I think that, I am so amazed and impressed by the calm and the pride that our journalists are exuding right now, and they are in a very they're in a hot zone, and I obviously have known some of these people for decades, and they share with me how they're feeling, and what they're learning, and so I'm not only proud of their work, but I think it's essential that we continue to cover it as best we can. And of course, because we have an amazing network of journalists across the country, we can go and take deeper dives, whether it's in Washington or whether it's with somebody in Ottawa or somebody in Toronto, to sort of provide some of that historical context while we're looking at the news of the day.
Brody, I want to turn it over to you because the CBC's faced criticism covering this story, as I think everyone has. Talk to me about the biggest challenges for you, and also I'm curious about language, some of the language that we've used and the criticism around that.
So the challenges, there's so many. First of all, our budgets aren't structured to deal with climate change disasters and having to evacuate a station because wildfires are bearing down on Yellowknife, and then throw in a war in the Middle East. And to do this well, it costs a lot of money. So that's a challenge. I thank goodness every day for the skill and expertise we have in a long history of covering this conflict. So we have just incredible correspondence on the ground. It is an internal domestic issue as well, though. Managing a newsroom that is made up of people who are more than ever in the history of the CBC, in the history of Canada, connected to this story in some way. So I've been noticing that. Like this is, this idea of the global story is the local story now. It's truer now than ever. And so all of the tensions and friction outside exist inside. and it is so that's a management issue. How do we keep people calm? How do we keep them focused? And how do we make sure that people who are feeling anxiety and or emotion are able to do the journalism and respect each other even within our newsrooms? And then on language, well, yeah, I mean, on that Saturday, same position as everyone else. We were in the middle of skeletal staffing, reduced programming. It's Thanksgiving weekend, massive scramble to get people out the door. We did really well, actually, and we had people there fast. And as we do in those moments, we sent out some internal guidance on, hey, here's how we've been covering this conflict for many, many decades, a reminder of our language guide. And unfortunately, someone took a snapshot and sent it out. So I've had to do a bit of explaining. And I'll just say the last thing to say, but it's important to remember, I shared with teams yesterday a note that one of my predecessors wrote in 2002 about the controversy over our language guidance, and responding to the Globe and Mail in a column about how outrageous CBC is, about how it uses the terms terrorist and terrorism. And so this is not new. We've been here before, and we're not alone. For some reason, the CBC is the only one who's asked the question about how they use language. I know that many other organizations do it the exact same way, and for very good reason. Lots of international. I'm curious what my colleagues, how they handle that language. But that's, it's just things now spin so quickly, and maybe we didn't respond quickly enough. It's hard when you're trying to figure out how to cover a war and respond to a public relations issue.
Can I just jump in for 1 second? For anybody in the room who hasn't read the piece that Brody wrote about what he just explained, you should seek it out. It is really, really, I found it really well done. I thought it explained the challenge that you were dealing with in an extraordinary way, and particularly those here who are students or just entering the field of journalism. I think you would get great benefit from giving it a quick read.
Thank you. This was supposed to be a bear pit, but okay. Thank you, and I've read it as well, and it's quite enlightening. So Amar, I want to end with you on this question, and we'll have time for Q&A. Actually, I should look at my watch because I just want to make sure that I'm not taking all the questions here. I know people have questions, but Amar, we're not getting information from Gaza as we are from Israel because journalists are not allowed. They're, you have to get approval from the Israeli government, and then Hamas has to approve a foreign correspondent in there. So it's not happening. How has that influenced your coverage? And also, you deal with a lot of different ethnic backgrounds as well through Omni. Talk to us about your challenges.
So look, I would just say this. Yes, we may not have crews on the ground, but we do have people who have family and friends there, so you are able to get interviews in that are giving you a sense of what life is like on the ground in Gaza and also in Israel. So I want to make that clear. And I would just say that, look, this story's been challenging for our Jewish friends, our Arabic friends. They've had a hard time with it. So it's been hard. You're trying to navigate all this. But we've also got people in our on our teams that are former refugees. So when you talk about how important words are and the impact that it has on people's lives, they've seen it firsthand. And strangely, maybe not strangely, hopefully, those are the journalists that have not pushed back on language. They have understood the responsibility they have as journalists to report the story fairly, accurately. They have respected it all the way through. Like Ward was talking about, we have a great privilege that I can go home and, I was telling John, I said, oh man, I'm just so tired, I didn't want to watch any news last night. Yeah, because I have that privilege. But somebody that comes from, that has family or friends with that zone, it's all encompassing. You can't turn it off. It's a part of your dinner conversation. And some of our teammates that are from those communities, they're having a hard time. It's 24/7. And then you get pushback from your own community. Well, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? It's hard to navigate all that. So you end up trying to just take care of people all the time. I would just say it's hard, and this is not, it's not a story that looks like it's going to be over soon. So it's a bit of a marathon, and you are concerned about people's overall health. So
And I mean, look at how we're talking about this, right? 10 years ago, we would not be having this type of conversation about the mental health of our journalists on the ground. And also, I'm so glad you pointed out the children of war, because this has been triggering to so many people who have gone through wars in their lives, just even seeing this coverage. So that's a really important note. I'm really glad you mentioned it. We can talk more about the Middle East if those of you who are in this room have questions a little bit later, but I want to move on to something closer to home, and that is Bill C-18, the Online News Act. Brody, actually, let me start with maybe Amar this time, and we'll go this way. What do you hope to see, and do you think it's going to make a difference?
Look, we appreciate the government's attempt to fix some financing issues when it comes to news. Not sure C-18 is the right way of going about it, and there are challenges around it, and even if those challenges get fixed, any financial relief is 2 to 3 years away. Our public position is that we would like to see tax credit program fixed instead, and that be expanded to allow broadcast journalism to be included in tax credits, because that's more of an immediate need, and it will fix the immediacy of what we are looking for.
It's an incredibly important piece of legislation, and obviously we're in support of any efforts to level the playing field. I think it speaks to a bigger issue, though, is that people expect news to be available. Not everybody wants to pay for it, and there's been a history of news being supported by networks. And prime time would have covered the cost of news. News was seen as an essential service, but also a bit of a cost center. And it is, for reasons we've discussed already, in just deploying people to different news stories. At the end of the day, for me, it's always about, well, how can we continue to live in a world where disruption doesn't bother me, but where literally billions of dollars are being extracted from the Canadian economy in the marketing space with these giant tech companies that go unchecked, that can put false information, hateful information, attacking online journalists, and really not reinvesting back into the economy in any meaningful way. And that is not to say that we haven't worked with Meta and we haven't worked with Google. In fact, we have ongoing relationships with them. But when you give up your own platform and rely on somebody else to take your content and use it for some brand extension without the actual investment in journalism, this is what is at stake for us. And I just feel that it is that level playing field when organizations like ours are, because we have a broadcast license and aren't offered subsidies, the CBC being the exception, with just journalism in general. There's expression funding. We're currently, Chorus is not entitled to expression funding. We are entitled to it, but we're not currently receiving any. We've lost money because our ownership has changed. So we're doing everything we can to keep news in front of people. And everybody's like, well, we don't like your news. And you're doing a terrible job. And it's like, okay, so what is important to Canadians here? What is it? That we have fair and balanced coverage, that we have a level playing field where we're not, in our organization, currently spending 30% of our entire revenue base goes back into Canadian programming. And news is a big part of that. So we're not desperately feeling like we're victims, to be clear, particularly at Global News. We are fighting for the best news we can put out there. This legislation, whatever these people at Meta decide to do, that's up to them. That's their business model. So we're going to continue to focus on just being skilled at hiring diverse and qualified journalists, and ideally, and we're seeing it, where people are coming to our platforms, frankly, more than ever. And that, to me, is, despite all this doom and gloom about how boohoo news, we're reaching more audiences than we've ever had. And we've actually seen our online grow since Meta shut it down. And frankly, they stopped giving us money 3 years ago. Google is a different story, and we'll see where that one ends up. But that's a short answer, by the way.
Richard, do you think it's going to make a difference?
I hope it does. I really hope it does. Because, for all of the reasons that you've heard here this morning, I mean, news continues to be very important. And, I said at the outset that the thing that keeps me awake at night is the economic challenges of our business. And the biggest economic challenge that our business faces is declining revenues. And our revenues are in decline because advertisers have made a conscious decision to shift away from traditional broadcast and direct ad dollars to the digital space, to the Metas and the Googles. And I think it's really important, sort of as we're talking about this, to keep into context how the Canadian system has worked. We all have to pay our way. We are all obligated to pay a percentage of our revenues for the betterment of our system. We have expenditure expectations that the CRTC levels on our business related to funding programs of national interest. We have Canadian programming expenditure requirements. We are obligated to make investments into journalism. And all of those things are critically important. All of those things are what help define us as Canadians, not just in this country, but around the world. And, as our advertising revenues have shrunk, our ability to do those things is radically compromised. And, the government has been struggling with this problem for a number of years. I mean, there have been debates ongoing, and, you can just change the phrase in fee for carriage, LTIP. There were a number of different solutions proposed, and some adopted in the short term, some dismissed outright. And that was before we faced the challenge that we do today. So that's kind of a long answer to, yeah, I am hopeful.
Brody, it's a bit different for you where you sit, but what do you hope to see?
Well, I think that I can't add a whole lot more than my colleagues, but I think two things it's quite clear. I agree with those who say that the era of social news is dying or almost is dead. So that's a big recalibration for us. How do we make sure that audiences that we have built to our owned and operated platforms continue to visit those, and where can we extend through third parties? And I think our third party extensions, we're always quite wary about the risk of what we've seen Facebook do. But Facebook was already pulling out of news anyway. Google is a whole other thing, and I guess I'm thinking a lot about here is really the front door of the internet for most people. It would have a significant impact on any news organization if Google were to suddenly shut down linking to news. I don't know how they do that, frankly. It would be remarkable, but we're watching that closely, and we'll see what happens when these regulations are supposed to come into effect. But I think the bigger picture is we just need to tell the story of this well. These are multinational companies, and they actually are so powerful, they don't really care about governments and regulation, and maybe they don't need to. I think we need to do a better story of telling it. I don't think a lot of people actually realize that news just sort of evaporated from their feeds. And what's left in place of that? Wow. I mean, the ecosystem for information is so distorted if you don't have news and independent fact-based journalism available. What's left? It's everything that's not that. And I'm not sure people realize that the balance has just been tipped so dramatically.
And people are monetizing this disinformation, right? Like that's the other thing.
Yeah.
And when you talk about YouTube or Twitter, so there's also an incentive to get the wrong information out there. I want to talk about trust now because I think this is a big topic. You're going to hear from Beatrice Politi and Daryl Bricker from Ipsos soon about the results of a survey on trust. The Canadian picture looks brighter than in the U.S., which is great news, but still, trust is at an all-time low. And I think we really need to work to get it back. How are we going to do that? Richard, I'll start with you on this one.
Wow. How are we going to get it back?
No pressure.
I mean, I think, and this may sound like the most simplistic of answers to your question, I think we just need to continue to do what we have done historically. Cover things in such a way that it's balanced, accurate, and fair always. Make sure we are giving voice to all sides of a particular issue. And I think if we continue to do those things, I'm confident that we are going to see a turn in this country attitudinally, or perhaps a better way of phrasing it is a return in this country to a different place, a different space. I think a lot of that mistrust that you talk about, comes from what I'm going to call general disillusionment. There is no question that the pandemic had a massive impact on this country in many, many ways. From my standpoint, one of the biggest being it just changed everybody's mindset about everything. And then I think, on top of that, there is a massive amount of discord in this country as it relates to political leadership. I think there is, there's a very large portion of the population that is looking for new and different leadership than we currently have today. And and that voice is getting louder and louder and louder all the time.
Amar, I'll turn it to you. How do you feel we can get trust back and get,
No, I think, to Richard's point, I think doing good quality journalism, that's the bedrock, and we can't ever stop doing that. But I also think we need to do a better job of sort of letting just the general public know on how we do things. I think in terms of media literacy, we fall well behind because most people simply don't understand what we do. And it's a struggle that I faced with my family, right? My kids grew up listening to 680 News when they were getting ready for school. And yet, again, like during the pandemic, they fell into that same trap. Oh, Dad, why is this on news? Why are you doing this? Why aren't you covering it? I said, you guys cut your teeth listening to news all the time. And yet that understanding of, what is news and how do we tell stories is just not there. And I think maybe, doing a better job of media literacy would also help people understand, why certain things are the way they are, why we do need to check and verify everything, why we just simply can't label anything, any word that we want, why words have power and consequences. So I think that would go a long way as well.
It's also hard, and I mean, this week was a great example of this, right? Of how, the 40 babies line that we heard both, Biden and Netanyahu say, and then how a lot of organizations like, and I think cable news is different in the States, but we had CNN quickly say that, this was an Israeli airstrike, and without even saying that we don't know all the details. And so I think even when we hear our leaders say stuff that is not backed by evidence, that also is challenging. How do we refute that? What do we do to explain to people how things are happening?
Oh boy, trust is a funny thing, and I think about Ipsos and how it's always reminding us that you don't have a lot of trust. And we're somewhere down there with used car salesmen. Last I checked, and everybody here has an opinion on how you earn trust. You just don't declare that you can trust us. And my feeling is, you look at sort of where else is trust applied. Do we trust our government? Do we trust our health care? Do we trust the services that we're buying? Do we trust contractors? The news trust is, over time, and this is really what it is it's the attack of the brand, this fake news. And trust is going to be increasingly hard to verify what's real and what isn't. And our role remains the same. And I agree with Richard that there is a basic strength in attribution of ensuring that there is balance, ensuring that we are not, if we can't verify something, we say we can't, but we know that this is being reported. Obviously, social media, and we talked a little bit about, the traffic, the currency of facts is lost on social media in many ways. And we're in the business of truth. They're in the business of traffic. And these facts aren't always qualified. So the consistent standards being applied day in and day out, ensuring that there is experience in the room and that there is a broad discussion of diverse opinions and voices, this is what trust is to me. And in many cases, I think we've lost people who are down a rabbit hole somewhere, getting a different version of the scene. Their alternative facts work for them. They fit their ideology and who they are and what they want to believe. I'll tell you this, though, and I'll end on this, and I don't want this to sound, sort of disrespectful of the question, but our news organization has slightly more people watching us on television this year than we did the year before. That's remarkable in a declining market of TV. We're talking linear broadcast television. Flat, slightly up. We have more people than ever watching our streaming services. We're up 6% year over year on our digital sites. So maybe they don't trust us. Maybe that's okay that they don't trust us. But they're watching us and they're listening to us and they're ideally taking some bit of information that we're providing for free to them.
Right.
So you can trust us or you can't. But I think that what we're trying to do is live up to the standards of trust and what it means to me and to our teams.
Okay. There's something that came out of the Ipsos polling, and knowing all of you, this is going to be very sad to hear. Also, those of you in the audience, I was so disappointed when Liz told me about this. So there's a generational difference as well when it comes to trust in news, to the point where Ipsos found that younger Canadians are more accepting of news curated by algorithms targeting them, even if that news is not true, as long as they are entertained. What's your reaction to that, Brody?
Well, I have two of those young people in my life, and I pay close attention to them and their friends. I actually think I give younger people more credit. I think they get news differently than us, for sure. It comes to them. They're also interested superficially in lots of things until they're not. And then they go deep, deep into a story of interest. And they know how to find credible interest. And generally, those credible voices on some of the things they're interested in may not be traditional news. There are other people who have those interests. So I think that's what we have to figure out. How do we become a part of that conversation? On the trust thing, there's so much to say. We are organizations that try to reach for the center around a consensus. We have a belief that there are facts and there are shared facts, and that's really a hard place to be when the world is pulling into partisan, polarized camps. You're squeezed when people don't believe there are shared facts. And I don't think we should back down from where we are, because you mentioned the United States. The United States, with their cable news channels, they went the path of appealing to those audiences. And believe me, there's money there for sure, and there's audiences to be won if you decide to play to one side or the other. But then look at their trust scores are among the lowest in the world. So I think we have the right approach. I hope, like Richard, that it will speak for itself. And maybe even, we haven't even talked about AI, but I'm convinced AI will disrupt our worlds in ways that are almost impossible to imagine, but such intense disinformation and misinformation and deep fakes that perhaps news organizations will be a beacon in a really messy world, and maybe people will actually see the value in a world where they can't trust anything.
Is CBC using AI, and if so, how?
Well, great question, because we're all using AI and have been for years. Recommendation engines, typing into Google and it auto-completes. So really the focus now and what is all the conversation is around generative AI. So using these tools to actually create content. We've been very, very careful. We started with just publishing externally and internally an ethical framework around how we would use it for our journalism. We've done very, very little of generative AI, but it's coming fast and the tools are remarkable. And there are some good things that could be used that make lives of journalists easier, especially around versioning or transcription. But we are taking a very cautious approach. And at this point, nothing goes to the public without human oversight.
Okay. I wanted to throw this over to you as well, Richard and Amar and Ward. Are you using AI in your newsroom, generative AI at all in your newsrooms right now?
The only area where we're using it is looking at data and curating content through a better understanding of what on a website, what story, where it's placed, how is this normal traffic for where that placement is. If it's doing better, then there's an automatic curation. But in terms of writing it, in terms of having virtual anchors, we're not quite there yet. And there are discussions, and Brody and I have been part of these discussions around the verification of video, because that really is sort of one of the things that I think everybody in the room should, and anybody that knows how to edit video, you can really get lost and on fake video. And being entertained is one thing, but ensuring that the video is authenticated from the original source. That is a certification process that we're working with groups to ensure that, and our vendors, that when you shoot the video, when you edit the video, that there is something that's embedded in that so that it has verification of the video. And if your video is being used by somebody else not in that chain, then it's identified as fake. So there are ways that we can counter this. But, I'll leave it there for now.
If either of you have anything to add on AI? And then
all I was going to say is that we're looking at AI. It's a tool, and it has to just be looked at as a tool, but it cannot replace humans at all. I think kind of what Brody's talking about. Look, the final arbitrator on journalism must be humans. Vetting, writing, reporting, that is a human function. AI can be used as a way, for production efficiencies, for building graphics and other things. Like it will play a role. I think it would be remiss if we all said, oh, AI will have no role in the future. It will have a role in journalism, but I think we do have to draw a hard line about where what is human and what is AI. And I think if we get away from the journalism part of it, then we really open ourselves up to disinformation and deep fake videos that are going there unchecked. It's a dangerous, dangerous place.
We're not using it, we're. We consciously have decided not to until such time as we can do a fulsome examination and create a editorial policy and an appropriate framework. Now, I say that from a big picture standpoint. My hope is that everybody in our newsroom is functioning that way. But
is not writing
that's not necessarily something I can guarantee. But no, that's the approach that we've taken.
I should say that, we're also looking at it. We have editorial policy around it. But I wanted to get back to this idea of a generation, a younger generation, not trusting. And I think back, in when I was young, what I thought about government and news, and I think about, and forgive me, I'm a boomer, but I think about the people that were fighting for civil rights and the people that were fighting against war. And there wasn't a lot of trust in media. There wasn't a lot of trust in government. And so, yes, perhaps the younger generation is skeptical of what we're providing. And I think that's a healthy situation. I think that, young minds are so clever at understanding and debunking what is being fed to them as message. And my hope is that over time, as with many of us, you start to plug into different sources of information because you need something in your life that is not currently, either being a student or being, the literacy piece is, I think, a key one, and you mentioned this. How do you balance stodgy old news with something that's flashy and funny and providing at least one fact of information, which is then carried and spiraled and kicked around. So I think that there's a natural skepticism. Not only as a journalist, we should be questioning things, but as thinking people. And honestly, I hope that the youth continue to challenge and question what we're writing. And frankly, in our newsrooms, we hear this and we feel it and we admire it and we see it, and we work with them to learn ourselves.
I have to say, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just one quick thought. The one thing I do worry about is in media literacy courses. I can't believe my kids, by the way, did a media literacy course, and the teacher suggested the mainstream media can't be trusted. I thought, oh my gosh, but I think what I worry about is, are we talking, teaching, valuing the role of journalism in democracy? But actually naming that, I think we just assume it, maybe, that it is a fundamental pillar of a free and open society, and kind of a prerequisite for a healthy democracy. But I'm actually not sure that conversation's happening. And because if we really did value it, so this is the big picture society kind of question, but do we value journalism and in that role or not? And if we do, then how do we tolerate public figures and other organizations suggesting that the media is a terrible enemy of the people? That I wonder about, and I don't even know if my own kids actually understand the Fourth Estate.
Sorry, just take off on your point here. I mean, you look at everything that went on with the Greenbelt fiasco. The only reason that decision got turned down was reversed was because journalists were on the story. And I don't think, to your point, Brody, I don't think that people really truly understand the role journalists played. And it was across the board, like journalists from every organization were digging, pushing, and holding the government's feet to the fire, which is what they should be doing.
But also, isn't that a great example? For me, I was thinking about this last night. Do we still matter? Heck yeah. The Star, Narwhal, our organizations, the Globe and Mail, that journalism caught something happening, government had to respond, ended up reversing. So we still matter. And we should hold on to that as a big victory. But then the sad thing is how many city halls or legislatures have bare-bone staff, if anyone on premises.
What more could we do?
How much more could we do? Right.
But I think there is a fundamental challenge in how we still matter. I agree with all of you 100% from the standpoint of what it is we do and holding government to account. That is absolutely critical. But our audiences are shrinking. Families don't gather around the radio to hear the morning news the same way that they used to. They don't gather at 6 p.m. to watch the local news the same way that they used to. They don't make watching the news at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. the same kind of appointment they used to. And I think we, as an industry, have got to do a better job making it a priority to remind people about the important work that we're doing and the necessity for them to continue to want to consume us, at 8 a.m. and at 6 p.m. and at 10 or 11 p.m. Because the work that we're all doing is incredibly important, and it makes our country better.
It's sad we have to prove it, but maybe we all need promos on the green belt about what our organizations have done. But it's, maybe the onus is on us to have to prove that. I'm going to turn it over to questions because we don't have a lot of time left. This discussion has been going so well. Yes, go ahead.
My question is, numbers are for Zoomer.
You're getting a mic. Just give me 2 seconds there. Great.
Thank you very much. My name is Bobby Hristova with CBC News. My question is, we know the economic challenges are impacting staffing. At the same time, we're having big stories come up that require a lot of context. How are newsrooms balancing the fact that many people are on part-time or casual contracts, and yet we also need people with institutional knowledge and experience to cover these stories? So how are you trying to manage that when people are jumping from newsroom to newsroom to newsroom or job to job to job?
Well, I would say it's our biggest challenge is in ensuring and attracting, retaining talent. We work very closely, I would say, as a leadership group to make choices. And the choices that we've been making at Global News is to look carefully at all aspects of our business and to invest resources into the growing parts of our business. If television audiences are shrinking in some cases, it's because they're consuming it elsewhere. And, we work closely with, I would say closely, and we have a good working relationship with our union. And we hear from them, and they put us on notice when there is a perception that we're not being fair to people. We still have a huge organization. I mean, we're talking, all in with radio, online, and television, close to 700 journalists. And that's a big number across the country. And we're in 15 communities across our country. So we're doing our best to manage this. But we also know that put it this way, what we're doing is we're putting resources around stories as opposed to shows. And we're putting resources at using local, national, online broadcast to ensure that we're covering the big story of the day effectively and in making sure that it's on multiple platforms so that there is audience if it's not the traditional one. I'm not sure I answered your question. But
I just want to jump in and perhaps I'm going to answer your question in a different way. I think it's absolutely critical that everybody in this room and everybody in our business understand the shift that has gone on. The shift that has gone on, driven by economics, is that there is no longer money to do everything the way that we used to and want to do. What happens now is the task of all of us on this stage, and it should be the task of all of you as well, is to be thinking about ways to spend every dollar most effectively. And I know that is a fundamental shift and change in the world of journalism and how our newsrooms exist, but that is the practical reality. The reality is that we have more finite resources than we ever have, and we've got to figure out a way to utilize those resources the most effectively to do what we think is important. And I'm going to give you an example from a CTV perspective. Yes, earlier this year we made a decision to close 2 of our foreign bureaus. And there were people who were displaced as a result of that. But here's the rest of the story. The rest of the story is that by making that change, we have created 4 new videographer positions and dispatch staff in provinces that we previously did not have national news staff in. I've added 4 weekend reporting positions that allow my national news correspondents to be deployed more effectively across a 5-day work week. And I've added a full-time dedicated storyteller to CTV News Channel. So again, what was perceived to be a cut in what it is we were doing actually turned out to be a reinvestment in other things. And that was because we made an analysis of what what we were doing today, what our goals are, what our needs were, and made a determination as to how to spend dollars more effectively. And I would encourage all of you, as you are doing your jobs on a daily basis, to be thinking about that and to be thinking that the people that you're responsible to and are reporting to are making those difficult choices every day.
Thank you for that, Richard. Do we have time for one more question, or do you think we're at time? Go ahead. We have time for a quick question, and then we have to wrap.
Maybe I'm not the best person to ask for a quick question then. Is this something that you touched on briefly, Richard? The media market now is seeing a lot of layoffs. With Ottawa Citizen, Montreal Gazette, they've been having a hard time keeping staff. And I'm wondering, as an undergrad student and a freelance reporter, what can I do? What can people do in general to get into an industry that seems to have trouble keeping these positions open in the first place?
Great question, and I'm gonna preface my answer with this: that while the situation now is far more intense than it has ever been, certainly in the period of time that I've been in the business, there have been a number of points in time where I'm going to say the situation has been very similar. Like I was in journalism school at what is now Toronto Metropolitan University when the CBC made a decision to close 10 local stations. And I remember going to school that evening and to my television broadcasting class, and the instructor who worked at CBC, Ann Medina, giant in journalism in Canada, stood before us and said, yesterday, everybody in this room could have reasonably expected to have a job upon graduation. And today, one or two of you may be lucky to get that opportunity. I share that because, I want to make sure everybody who's in your position understands that opportunities do exist and they're going to continue to exist. And I've always believed, and anytime I've been asked, how do I break into the business? How do I make sure that, I have a career that, I find fulfilling and rewarding through continued employment as a journalist? I say the same thing. Be an exceptional content creator, and the jobs will find you. If you're really good at what you do, and you're dedicated to the craft of journalism, you'll be able to find a job. It may not necessarily be working for one of us. It may be part of a digital platform or something else. But I think there's always going to be demand for really great content and exceptional journalism. And if you can demonstrate an ability to do that, you'll find a job.
It's a great place to end off. Let your work speak for itself. And you're at the right place, because there's a lot of discussions on this tomorrow and a lot of people you can speak to tomorrow as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to RTDNA President Liz Travers. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for the open, honest discussion of often difficult topics. And I really appreciate, and I think we all appreciate you coming here and talking about these things, because they're things as students who are going into the business and people who have been here for a long time. It's always on our minds. It's a difficult time. I do want to thank Canadian Press for sponsoring this session, and I'm happy to say that you're all going home with the brand new CP style book. So there'll be one for each of you. Yes. And the other thing I wanted to say is, coming up is our Ipsos, the results of our Ipsos poll, and I think we're above the used car salesman word. You'll be happy to know. I think we've gone ahead. So I think, I think so. So that's a relief. Please just give us a few moments to switch some chairs around. Take it as your phone break. Look at your phone. Feel free. Keep it on silent. But I want to thank you again for coming and being part of this.